So welcome back, everybody, to this week's offering of Webinar Wednesday. It's great to have you with us. An episode this week that is specifically directed at our higher educators, those of you that work in our universities and our technical colleges and in other fields related to higher education. Of course, we'll have some nuggets in here for all of you in the K-12 world or in other areas as well, but specifically focusing this week on the world of higher education and how that world has been and will be disrupted, as Melissa mentioned, in the next several years. So we're going to talk about 6 things this afternoon, 6 areas in which we believe higher education will see disruption. The first one is in this whole area of delivery methods that match the learner. Now, I have to tell you, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I was not growing up your typical classroom learner. In fact, as I posited in this article I wrote for Production Machining magazine very, very recently, I said that getting in trouble in grade school made me a better executive. I was the kid in grade school who could not sit still. My teachers called me rambunctious. I was called hyperactive. They say, why can't Matthew slow down? Why is Matthew always in a rush? Why does Matthew always need to be the center of attention? And the truth is that all of those things were true of me when I was going through my education pathway. I can also tell you that those are the very things, as we say in this article, that I think made me a better leader in the 23 years that I was running US manufacturing companies. Because the truth is, being in a rush, moving quickly, solving quality problems, wanting to make your production lines work more efficiently, not applying yourself to outdated methods of manufacturing. Those are the things that make businesses more efficient and make them more successful. So the very things that I got in trouble for in grade school, middle school, and high school were the things I believe that made me more successful and allowed me to gain whatever degree of success I did as a corporate executive. So I want everybody to think about that. Think about our typical educational journey. And what I have realized over the course of time was, in as much as I was constantly getting in trouble in school for not doing exactly what my teacher wanted me to do and being told that my behavior wasn't right for the world of education, what I've learned in hindsight is that it's exactly the other way around. The way that I was being taught, the way that I was being engaged in school wasn't right for me. I was a hands-on kinesthetic learner, which is why classes like art class and gym and band appealed to me so much. It's why those were the ones that I actually enjoyed the most, because those were the courses and classes where we could actually do something, and they aligned with my style of learning. So as we look to the future, we will be using artificial intelligence to greatly improve the experience of a young person's educational pathway and educational pathways for people of all ages. This is my friend Rick Anderson, just sold Smart Choice MRI. When we asked him a while ago, what trend is taking place in your business that college deans should be aware of, Rick pointed to artificial intelligence and machine learning. When we asked that same question of Louis Gentine, the CEO of Sargento, if you like cheese as much as I do, you know who Sargento is. And Louis said, if we look at AI for prediction, that is a key trend in our business that college deans should know about. Well, the truth is that we can use artificial intelligence in education as well. Artificial intelligence actually isn't as complicated as some people make it out to be. As my friend Murtaza Bora tells us, if we think about intelligence as a combination of, number one, our experiences, the things that happen to us in life, the way that we link those experiences to other experiences, number one, and number two, learning. That is the process of increasing our own knowledge. He says, if we think of intelligence as those two things, then Bora tells us that AI is just a mathematical representation, an algorithmic implementation of our own intelligence, making and helping machines think more like people. If you're confused by that word algorithm, that's not complicated either. An algorithm is just a list of instructions and rules that a computer needs in order to complete a task. So artificial intelligence, really fairly simple. Let's talk now about artificial intelligence in education. Came across this really interesting article not too long ago by Forbes columnist and author Bernard Marr. So he's written like 18 different books on futurism, on what's going to happen in technology. Fascinating individual, writes a regular column in Forbes magazine. Now, to prove that artificial intelligence doesn't always work exactly the way that we want it to, I went to Unsplash, which at least for me is the #1 source for royalty-free photography to use in presentations like this. And I put in Mar's name. And what I got back was not a picture of Bernard Marr. There weren't any, but I got this really nice picture of a St. Bernard, which was close enough for our work today. So I use that as my backdrop. Let's talk about AI in education. What Marr says is that AI will allow a level of differentiation that's impossible for teachers to have now in a class, for instance, of 30 students. He says that there are several companies, and he names them, that are currently developing instructional design and digital platforms that use AI in how we deliver learning to students. And here's how. #1, we can use artificial intelligence. We can use artificial intelligence to track a learner's progress and give them the challenges, the exact challenges in their learning that they are ready for when they are ready for them. We can use artificial intelligence to identify gaps in an individual's knowledge and provide redirection to topics that are of interest to them or topics that are important to them in terms of their learning pathway. The other thing that's interesting is looking to the future. He says as AI gets more sophisticated, it may even be possible for a machine to monitor our facial expressions and to understand when a student is getting a little bit confused, and then to redirect them to learning that will help them through that confusion using artificial intelligence. This sounds crazy, but I'll tell you, I read an article just last week in the Wall Street Journal about a system that's being used by families in China that as students are doing their learning, it uses facial recognition, it uses monitoring and artificial intelligence to track whether or not they're paying attention at home when they're supposed to be doing their homework. And if they are not, sends an alarm to mom and dad. Now, we can argue about whether that's the world in which we want our children to grow up in, but the truth of the matter is that technology that Mara is talking about here, this is technology that in many ways isn't the technology of 5 or 10 years into the future. It is the technology of today. Now let's talk about less brick and mortar. As many of you know, we're pretty involved with the Tech Ed podcast. If you're not familiar with that podcast, they release a new episode every single week, talking to leaders at every level of education, talking to industrial employers who are keenly interested in what's happening in technical education. Not too long ago, we released an episode with the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and the Provost of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And here is what I asked Mark Money, the Chancellor. I said, what are some things that are going to happen in technical education in the next 5 years that our listeners might be interested in? Fascinating that he gave the answer that he did. Most leaders would punt that ball as far away as they could. They'd make up some kind of plain answer that wasn't controversial. Mark took that question head on, and his 5 predictions that he offered to us were absolutely fascinating. If you're interested in that, go back to techedpodcast.com, or you can go just about anywhere, Spotify, Apple, everywhere that you get your podcasts, and download that podcast and others. But the point is, here is what Mark Money said to me during our time together. He said, you're seeing today where people can learn from anywhere. People can learn from anywhere. That's a university chancellor recognizing, acknowledging the fact that the traditional way of teaching our students, the traditional way of learning, isn't the only way for people to learn. We don't have to sit in a classroom listening to a lecture. Not that that doesn't work, but we don't have to learn that way. There are other ways for us to learn. Now, I can also tell you that Johannes Spritz, who was the other guest during that episode of the Tech Ed podcast, told me a year ago that we in higher education stuffed 10 years of innovation into a matter of weeks as COVID set in, and we had to take all of our learning online. It's not a question of whether we can do this or not. We have proven that we can. The question is, how do we mix this in to traditional learning, and how do we find ways to do it better? How do we find ways to do it interactively? A really, really good example, and we've had teachers that have told us for years, I don't want to use e-learning. I don't want to use virtual skills in my courses. My students learn other ways. I have my own way of teaching. And then COVID came along, and all of a sudden we were getting phone calls from those same teachers saying, hey, I'm trying to teach PID controls to my students, but I can't do it in my lab anymore because we're not allowed in the building. What can you show us? And we started showing them solutions, online solutions that are available to teach a huge variety of different disciplines. And a lot of these teachers and instructors said, where have you been? A lot of these professors said, why weren't we using these 3 or 4 years ago? Well, the truth is, when the student is ready, the teacher shall appear. Those professors weren't necessarily ready to implement this in their classroom until they had to. And now once they had to, as we head into the fall, as we start thinking about what our programs will look like during our next academic year, many of them are finding really, really creative ways to mix in virtual learning, e-learning, online learning, and traditional classroom instruction to create a great experience for their students and learners. It is going to be fun to watch as we head into the 2021-2022 school year. Now, I'm not just somebody that proliferates, or I'm sorry, that promotes e-learning platforms. I'm a product of e-learning platforms. As COVID set in, I, along with the rest of our team, made a decision that we were going to continue to be a lifelong learning organization. We used an e-learning platform to learn Industry 4.0 technology like smart sensors and smart devices and advanced manufacturing and data analytics and cybersecurity and so on. And every single member of our team earned 2 certifications from the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. If you're not familiar with that organization, that is an organization that is really being driven by a whole slew of industrial employers and other employers across the Midwest and across the United States, defining competencies in Industry 4.0, and then creating certifications around those competencies. So our entire team, not just me, but our members of our accounting team, members of our administrative team, members of our marketing team, of our sales and business development teams, all of us earned those first 2 credentials during the year 2020. So I can tell you that I'm proud of those credentials. In fact, they show up on my LinkedIn profile as digital badges. I'm also proud of the fact that our team earned these credentials. Our producer, Melissa Martin, who we heard from just a few moments ago, posted this on LinkedIn at the end of this year. Her proudest accomplishment of the year 2020 was earning 2 Industry 4.0 certifications in basic and advanced operations from the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. Third-party credentials, taking our learning and chopping it up into smaller and smaller pieces and creating more and more flexible models for our students. That is part of what is coming in the world of higher education, as are more on and off ramps. What we mean by this is exactly this. We have to, as educators, find ways to make our educational models more flexible, find ways to meet our learners, our students, our prospective students where they are, by enabling the most flexibility we can to get them into our programs, out of our programs on a schedule that works for us. Last year on this venue, on this platform, Webinar Wednesday, we spent some time with a gentleman named Kevin Barnes. Now, Kevin is an adjunct professor at Western Michigan University. He is also an amazing instructor at Kalamazoo Valley Community College. And when he came on Webinar Wednesday and talked about his program, I thought to myself, what a great lesson for all of our listeners, for all of our viewers on the future of technical education, the future of STEM education, the future of higher education. Here's how Kevin's program works, and it's been working this way for well over 20 years. It's total open entry, open exit. Students get in and out on the schedule that works for them. There are no dedicated lectures. Think about that. In higher education program, students earning associate degrees, hands-on kinesthetic learners like me who don't have to sit in a lecture. To me, that would be music to my ears. Now, that's not true of everybody. Some people love lectures. That was just never my thing. Instead, Kevin's team uses an interactive e-learning platform where students are doing interactive e-learning on video game level graphics, multimedia-based e-learning that specifically targets the learner and enables them to move through the content at their own pace, not at one that is prescribed for them. If they want to move faster and they can gain the competencies, they get to move faster. If they need a little extra time, that's fine. They get to take a little extra time. No dedicated lectures, no dedicated lab times. Students can come in and out of the labs, do their hands-on skills on the schedule that works for them, on a schedule that works for their families, on the schedule that works with their work schedule, on the schedule that works for the student. Student centricity is a huge trend in higher education. They are the customer in many ways, not the only customer, but one of the most important ones, of course, finding ways to be more student-centric. Those students can begin the program at any time, literally at any time. We'll talk about that in a minute. and sign up for smaller modules. We talked about micro credentials. We talked about the importance of chopping our programs up into smaller bite-sized pieces and offering a credential for that bite-sized piece. Works perfectly in this model. If an employer or a student needs certain skill sets, they can get them as a result. They don't have to take the whole degree program if that's not what their employer needs. If we need to have a student that knows more about programmable logic controllers, knows more about variable frequency drives, knows more about fluid power, we can set them just in those courses and enable them to learn. He says we can offer, this is Kevin Barnes again, we can offer programs we never could have otherwise because we don't need a full cohort. How many of our community and technical colleges have to put off a program, have to put off a course because we don't have enough students to fill a cohort? We don't have this problem in a flexible learning model because students can start anytime they want. We only need a cohort of one in order to start a program. If an employer calls and says, when can my employees start learning? The answer is tomorrow. Here's why I think this is important. We are all products of our own inspiration, of things that our own impulses, things that interest us at a given point in time. And if I'm interested today in starting an electrical mechanical technology degree today, if I'm interested today in starting an engineering degree today, why do I need to wait till September? How about starting tomorrow when that enthusiasm is there, when that excitement is there? And a program like this allows the learner to do exactly that. It takes a combination of really good, highly interactive, multimedia-based e-learning. This isn't just going through and watching videos. It's highly interactive learning. It requires credentials. We have to be able to attach some form of a degree or a credential to the micro items that the student is learning. It requires an open lab concept and hours in a lab where students can come and go and do their hands-on skills. Most important and most difficult to implement, it requires a faculty that is open to change, a faculty that is open to thinking about learning in a little bit different way. Technology disruption in higher education, the 6 things on our list. We're going to talk now about number 4, which is universities as problem solvers. Some of you may recognize this gentleman as a former presidential candidate. Some of you may recognize him as our 19th Secretary of Health and Human Services here in the United States during the presidency of George W. Bush. Some of you may recognize him as the longest serving governor in the state of Wisconsin's history. And some may recognize him as the interim president of the University of Wisconsin system. Tommy Thompson is all of those and so much more. He joined us on the Tech Ed podcast earlier this year, and I asked him about the importance of universities partnering with private employers. Now, the first thing he said was, Matt, you are clairvoyant. I want to let that hang in the air and sink in for just a moment. So the 19th Secretary of Health and Human Services, the longest serving governor in the state of Wisconsin, the president of the UW system, called me clairvoyant. Thank you, Governor. For those of you who don't know, clairvoyant is having or exhibiting an ability to perceive events in the future or beyond normal sensory contact. Those are the governor's words, not mine. But he said, and I'm joking, Matt, you are clairvoyant. And then he said, every time businesses have a big problem, they should be going to the university. How can you help us out? They should say. How can we form a partnership? How can we have educators go into businesses and develop joint ventures for the benefit of the business and the benefit of the university? What a great vision for how higher educators can collaborate on research, on innovation with our corporate employers. And that is going to be a key tenet of the future of higher education. Let me show you some examples. This is a really cool project our team had the opportunity to work on at Wayne State, along with our partner Quanser. Autonomous vehicles. If you watched the Olympics a few years ago and you saw that swarm of drones that were flying in the air all together, and we all looked at that and said, how in the world are they doing it? This is how they're doing it. This is how they're doing it. Public and private research, joint research, grant-funded research created by private companies and educators, jointly writing the grant applications, jointly defining the outcomes of the grant, and then winning the grant and investing in research, investing in the future. These are the technologies that will drive our economy going forward. These are the technologies we should be exposing our students to. And we can do even more of that as we look to more public and private partnerships. Another great example, if you were on Webinar Wednesday a few weeks ago, this is actually not a higher ed application. This is an application for middle school and high school students learning autonomous vehicle technology. But it is based on technology that was developed at research level institutions, and then I'll dumb down for lack of a better term, but simplified for students that are in middle school, students that are in high school in an age appropriate, grade appropriate learning fashion, so that they can learn artificial intelligence, they can learn autonomous vehicle technology. But we can do this at the university level as well. This again is the middle school version, but at the university level, if you were on Webinar Wednesday about 4 or 5 months ago, when we talked about artificial intelligence, we talked about things like classification. We talked about using vision systems and algorithms and artificial intelligence to notice that that dog is actually a Samoyed, to notice that a book is a book or an iPod is an iPod. And we can also use what we call transfer learning. Remember when we talked about the fact that learning is just taking experiences, finding linkages between those experiences, and then building on those linkages in a way that we call learning. That's what artificial intelligence is. That's what we see on the right-hand side of the screen is over time, that algorithm, that machine learning algorithm gets smarter and smarter using transfer learning. We can partner between public universities and private companies to do research like this. Here's another example. On the left-hand side of your screen, what you see is somebody operating an autonomous vehicle or operating an RC car, an electric vehicle, using a remote control. And on the right-hand side, you see the vehicle driving itself. That vehicle got smarter and smarter using supervised learning, where we gave it the data labels, we gave it the behaviors we wanted it to show us, and we let it go after it. Another example of how this technology manifests itself in the real world. So we were using LiDAR on those vehicles to enable them to drive, to enable them to recognize signs, to enable them to recognize objects. Luminar, this was just yesterday, June 15th, 2021 is in that byline. Luminar is using LiDAR to help build what we expect to be the uncrashable car. This is something that was just announced yesterday. Imagine the uncrashable car. And we can have public universities, we can have private universities, we can have private employers working together on developing this next technology and building upon this next technology. The next item is flipped course progressions. Earlier this year, I spent some time on our podcast with the former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Indiana, the former president of the Indiana State Senate, and the individual who today leads Ivy Tech, the statewide community college system in the state of Indiana. Now, Sue Ellspermann said some really, really interesting things to me when she was on the podcast that I think are great lessons for higher education. First of all, she talked about the fact that she is an engineer. So she was certainly somebody involved in education, certainly somebody involved in public policy, certainly somebody involved in government. But before all of that, she was trained as an industrial engineer. And she said that she didn't get to the really cool engineering courses until her senior year of college. Her senior year of college was the first time that she had an opportunity to get into the really interesting engineering courses. She said, instead I had to take 3 semesters of physics. I had to take 4 semesters of calculus. I had to learn differential equations. She said, especially for adult learners, this approach to education is problematic. She says, we know that those gateway courses, what we often call them gen eds, are things that can literally stop an adult learner. When they start with the skills-based courses, they build their own confidence. They learn how to do college. They learn how to take exams. And then when it gets to courses like math and English and some of the more challenging courses for some of them, they're ready for those courses. Now, you can take or leave Sue Ellspermann's advice for higher education, but what she believes, and I tend to agree with her, is that we need to think about four-year institutions doing the same thing. It's not just me that's saying this. My wife, Renee, the CEO of our company, is a degreed engineer, a master's degreed engineer. And she will tell you that if she had to do it over again, rather than going to undergrad and earning her bachelor's degree in engineering, going to grad school, earning her master's degree in engineering, she says, if I had to do it over again, I would start at a technical college and get contextual learning for what I was going to learn when I got to the university. And then we have a context for what it is we're learning when we get into some of those more challenging physics and calculus classes. Over the course of the last couple of years, we've had the opportunity to be involved in the team robotics competition here in the state of Wisconsin, not just be involved, but to literally be the key sponsor. Between us and our partner FANUC last year, we gave away close to $100,000, I think, in scholarships and equipment to the teams that competed in and won this robotics competition. And one of the coolest parts about it is that the teams that finished first, second, and third, we get to go to their school. We get to meet their principal. We get to meet their superintendent. We get to meet their parents, and we get to award them their scholarships and the prize that they won for doing so well in this robotics competition. It is amazing listening to these students and where they're going. Certainly, some of them are going direct to workforce, which is awesome. Some of them are going on to technical colleges and earning associate's degrees in things like electromechanical technology and automation engineering. And some of them are going on to four-year engineering pathways. I've talked to kids that were going to great engineering schools, including the likes of Princeton, MIT, and Northwestern, and many other great engineering schools as they move on from high school, from these team robotics competitions and from these courses they took in high school. Now, we're going to bring some of them back this summer because I want them to tell you, our viewers, on Webinar Wednesday, how valuable those hands-on courses working with authentic industrial equipment were to them in their high school pathway when they got to college, and how much further ahead of their peers they were because they understood the context of what they were learning in algebra, what they were learning in calculus, what they were learning in their physics courses. It's going to be a great episode. We look forward to having you for that one. But the truth of the matter is that these hands-on opportunities put into context all those things we learn in higher education. Fortunately, more and more colleges and universities are integrating hands-on labs into their programs. We did 5 webinars over the course of the last year just on programs that were integrating this type of technology into engineering, automation, manufacturing engineering, and other programs within a four-year college and beyond. So another example was Northwestern University that created really cool hands-on experiments for their physics program. Another example is the University of Wisconsin Stout, where they created great learning opportunities in robotics for their four-year engineering students. This video is one of a project that Quanser worked on, where we have reinforcement learning taking place, where we give the machine learning algorithm a reward for getting closer and closer to the answer we want, which is to hold that pendulum straight up. And over time, that algorithm gets smarter and smarter. Another great partnership with a great university. Same thing for the partnerships that we've done on the QBot, teaching autonomous vehicles, teaching ground robotics, teaching drone technology in many cases to students at the university level and giving them the context for what they're learning in the classroom. The Connected Systems Institute at UWM, I had the opportunity yesterday to be on a webinar with all the great people that are leading that effort here in the state of Wisconsin. Amazing hands-on opportunities for students in those programs to be able to understand and apply learning in a real-world example, high-tech, highly advanced manufacturing fashion in terms of learning technologies that are pertinent to manufacturing. So lots and lots of really, really good examples. The last one, number 6 today, we are going to talk about is lifelong learning. We are going to talk about lifelong learning. You know, according to Pearson, the big textbook company, 24% of employees say their employers don't offer any learning and development. Only 34% of large employers offer direct courses to employees. And the number one reason that students and learners and employees don't take advantage of tuition reimbursement programs is that life gets in the way. They're busy raising children. They're busy going to soccer games. They're managing maybe aging parents. We're working. We're trying to fit in a little bit of leisure time. It's almost impossible. I don't know how somebody goes with all of those other things going on and balances that along with a full-time or even a part-time education pathway. And so we've got to find more flexible and creative ways to deliver learning to our incumbent workers. Todd Wanek, CEO of Ashley Furniture, put it this way. He said, people work for people. People work for people they like, and people work for companies that they want to believe in. And he said, we want to make sure that our people that have been with us for many, many years have an opportunity to get new skills, to remain relevant in the changing world of work. And so what Todd and his team did was built an advanced technology maker center where learners can go in and they can learn all kinds of technology. They can learn it via e-learning. They learn it via hands-on skills. There are instructors and people there who can support them. And that is their model for providing hands-on learning and theory learning to their existing employees, to the people that work for them and work in their business today. Now, I met this gentleman when I was going through the Ashley Technology Maker Center. He's not too far from retirement. And we started talking, and we got to talking about the importance of lifelong learning. And he was learning about hydraulics, and he was learning about fluid power in his learning course. Now, you might say to yourself, why would we put a maintenance technician who's 2 years from retirement as an example in what higher education needs to do looking into the future? The answer to that question is quite simply this. If lifelong learning, if continuing education is important for somebody working in industrial maintenance, and in this case, looking at hydraulics where technology changes, but it's certainly not changing as fast as technology changes in some other fields of our economy. If it's that important for this gentleman to have his skills remain sharp, how important then is it for somebody in an engineering program? How important is it for somebody in a computer science career? How important is it for somebody in a data science or an automation or a robotics career, where that technology can change, not in a matter of years or decades, but oftentimes in a matter of months? We are entering a period of time in our world where lifelong learning isn't just a luxury, it's an absolute necessity if we are going to maintain current skills and current knowledge and be able to continue to add value for our employers. I'm going to finish up today with an example and a discussion from the world of finance, proving that this whole technology discussion isn't just about manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. It affects every single aspect of our economy. This was a conversation I had with the chief executive officer here in the US of BMO Harris Bank, David Casper, and he had along with him his head of North American Treasury and Payment Solutions, a gentleman by the name of Brett Pitts. Now, here's what Brett said about higher education, and I totally agree with him. He said, number one, I serve on an advisory board. I serve on the advisory board of the Graduate Business School at the University of Texas in Austin. He said, I work around this stuff. I listen to it. We're working on some really, really interesting things. He said, number one, people have to understand in business, the velocity of change is perpetually increasing. And as a result of that, as we just said, the need for topical specialized knowledge is too. The days where we can go through high school, go through college, and that's our career, those days are gone, folks. That is not the world that we're living in. We need more frequent periods, as Brett says, of education throughout one's career. That becomes really, really important. And I want you to think about our friend Kevin Barnes. I want you to think about Kalamazoo Valley Community College. I want you to think about the open entry, open exit, bits and pieces of education, pick what's important to you aspect of education. I want you to think about that example as we read this next quote. Brett Pitts says, education in bursts and on an as needed basis. When people in different life stages that don't necessarily lend themselves to stepping into a classroom or stepping out of full-time employment to engage in full-time education for years at a time, that we give those learners, we give those employees, we give those incumbent workers an educational opportunity to keep their skills sharp. And finally, Pitt says this will be transformational to education over the next 10 to 20 years. This is where I might part ways with him just a little bit in our thinking, because I don't know that it's 10 to 20 years. What if it's 5 to 10 years? Or what if it's possibly 2 to 5 years? What if this level of disruption has to come to higher education in the next 2 to 5 years? Well, folks, I want to go back to Johannes Britz's comment that because of COVID and higher education, we were forced to cram 10 years of innovation into a matter of months, into a matter of weeks. Higher education has proven that it can flex its model when it needs to. And I'm telling you today that in spite of the fact that we are coming out of our pandemic, at least we all hope that we are, and it looks as though we might be, we still need to flex that level and model of learning. And the organizations that do that, the organizations that figure this out, the organizations that find ways to deliver more flexible learning, to use less bricks and mortar, to create fewer rigid structures and more on and off ramps for their students, to understand the key role of education in research as it relates to private innovation, to understand that we need to find more and more ways to engage our learners early, to give them hands-on skills and contextual learning earlier in their education pathway, not save it for the end. And we have to commit ourselves to a model of lifelong learning, bringing those individuals that are already in the workforce back into the world of education to make sure that their skills remain relevant, make sure that their skills remain current, so that they can continue to live a life of success, live a life of prosperousness, to be able to support their families, and to be able to reinvest in their communities. This is the future of higher education, and we appreciate you being with us today. I'm going to invite Melissa back onto the stage here and find out what interesting questions rolled in from our audience yet again this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know our time is running short, and this is a really, really big topic. And so if any of our attendees wants to talk about this further or discuss how this could look in your own organization, I know Matt would agree with me that we'd be happy to just talk ideas with you. We've been talking to a lot of people, so we have ideas from a lot of different organizations who are, doing different things. I guess one question, Matt, before we wrap up our time here, is there's a lot of, when we talk about continuing education and flexible models of continued learning, there's a lot more learning opportunities popping up, like LinkedIn courses or Udemy or, different places people can get continuing learning courses online. How do you see this as competitive to higher education? And how do you see that playing out?
Well, it's a great question, Melissa. I look at those platforms as they're mediums. They're mediums for delivering learning. And there's a lot of different ways for us to learn. There always have been. I mean, for my entire career, we've had things like seminars. We've had different companies that have offered learning on a continuing education basis in areas of, such as safety, in areas such as learning how to utilize software. So that there's always a place for that. There is also, in my opinion, always a place for really, really innovative higher educators. And the truth of the matter is that an education in many ways is about a brand. One of my son's friends earlier this week was named the captain of the Yale soccer team. And of course, a lot of people are looking at that and saying, wow, that's a kid that can write his own ticket. And the answer is he probably will be able to write his own ticket. The truth of the matter is that where we were educated, how we were educated, that's a brand. That's a brand that we own. When we put that credential on our LinkedIn profile, whether that is a soccer credential, whether that is our degree and what college, what university, what high school we earned that degree from, that is a brand. And that brand of higher education will continue to be really, really important. I would encourage higher educators to look at mediums like LinkedIn Learning and find out if there's opportunities for them to push their content out on a platform like that. It may aid their economic model and their financial model. It's also a great way to market the program. So I think there's certainly plenty of room for both of those models in the future of higher education.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll leave it to you to wrap up.
All right, very good. Well, thanks everybody for another episode of Webinar Wednesday. Great to have you all on with us again this week, talking about, as you can tell, the topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is how do we continue to create relevant and exciting educational opportunities for our students and learners in higher education. You won't want to miss next week's edition of Webinar Wednesday. We are going to be broadcasting live from Dearborn, Michigan. And what's taking place in Dearborn, Michigan, and has been taking place in Wisconsin this week, is that there is a group of people that are training instructors, teachers, professors, industrial employers on how to take Industry 4.0 learning back into the classroom, back into the workplace. And we're going to be talking about a program called Ignite and a curriculum called Ignite, which is literally igniting and sparking the interest in young people in careers in advanced manufacturing. And we're going to be doing that live from that training site. So you won't want to miss next week's edition of Webinar Wednesday. Until then, thank you for being with us. We are here every Wednesday at 2 o'clock Central, and we will see you next week.